member of the working group and you're in a place where it's comfortable and safe to do so, that you do have your camera on. And then if you're a guest here to testify, that you leave your camera off until you're called to speak to the working group, just so everybody can focus on one another and on the speaker who is addressing the group. It is 8:59 by my clock. We're going to give this just another 2 to 3 minutes, but we have a very full agenda of folks coming to talk to the group today. So we'll get going in just a couple of minutes. And once again, if you're a member of the working group and you're in a place where it's comfortable to do so, we'd love to have your camera on. And if you're somebody from the public or from an organization who will be addressing the working group, we ask that you leave your camera off until you're called to address the group.
Maureen, those are great earrings.
Thank you. Thank you. They're made from gourds, actually. I'm on the board of a group called Earthlinks, and we work with unhoused people, and we make jewelry and candles and give jobs and then sell. And these are earrings that were made. I love them. So thank you.
I can see why you do, for many reasons. Great cause.
Well, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, I've got 9:01. Should we go ahead and get started if you'd like to welcome everybody?
Tom, you want to start?
Sure. Well, Happy New Year, everyone. Welcome back. I'm sure you were just waiting all holiday week to get back to this. Now, in all seriousness, we got a lot of great stuff to do. We're going to hear from a lot of interesting folks today in public comment. And I'm looking forward to learning more and hearing from everybody. So I think the agenda has been disseminated. I don't know, Maureen, if you wanted to add anything else.
Just briefly, we have our meeting Friday where we'll send out the agenda after this meeting where we're going to really start our work and our discussion of our recommendations in light of all the testimony. It will start with a presentation from Vera for 15 minutes about their national perspective, and then we'll proceed to discuss issue-related matters related to our recommendation. But the meeting is moved, as Janet is well aware. Our building at 1300 Broadway is closed for the rest of the week. Stan, I'm assuming you can confirm that. There was a criminal episode at the building last evening and damage done to the building. And so the building has been closed to everybody. We can't even get in to get our materials. So Mike Weissman, Representative Weissman, has reserved the room back at the Capitol. So for those who are coming in person, we will be in the House Committee room, the one across the hall from where we were before, but we will be set up there with Zoom and ability for public and for us to sit around and discuss our agenda. So we will be across the street on Friday.
I guess the only other thing, and I think Barrett's probably going to address this with all of those who intend to present today or give their comments. It's really important to help this committee by staying focused on the issues that have been provided in terms of the prompt and what we're trying to achieve. I know so many of you have a lot of policy concepts on where you want policy to go in the state, but we really need to hone in on how to form this group or groups to get the ball rolling on that. So the more you can focus on that purpose, the better we're gonna do today.
Thank you, Tom. And you are correct. I just want to, set some norms for today's conversation, and we're going to dive right into it. And for those who have just joined, if you're a member of the working group, we do ask that you turn your camera on if you're in a place where that's comfortable and safe to do so. If you are not a member of this working group, we ask that you turn your camera off unless and until you're going to be presenting and speaking to the group. I will also say, to Tom's point, we have a very full agenda. We'll be using every single minute of it in order for folks to be able to speak to this group. To that end, that does mean that I'm going to be tightly moderating and facilitating time. With the very few exceptions of some folks that we had to carry over from the last conversation, everybody is being given 7 minutes. That's inclusive of your remarks and any time you want to leave for members of this working group to ask you questions. We're going to have this person speaking spotlighted on the Zoom screen, except that you will see me pop on from time to time with the 2-minute and then the 1-minute warnings. So we'll be giving you that brief, but if everybody would just really do your best to keep yourself to that time, it may not sound like much, but if we gave each person just 15 or 30 extra seconds, we'd be adding about 20 minutes, which would mean we would have to bump several people off this call. So I'll just ask everybody to cooperate, and I'll apologize in advance that we may have to move on as some folks are wrapping up. With that said, I would ask if anybody is comfortable submitting written comments of what you wanted to cover today, please send those over to tcjj@confluencepsg.com. Carrie and I will also follow up with you on that. And we'll do our best, if people have questions, to filter those back out to all of the members here. So with that, I'm going to key up the first two presenters. And first will be Amanda Blackwood, followed by Courtney Sutton. So Amanda, welcome you on, and thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this. I am a survivor of human trafficking 3 different times. A lot of people don't realize that people who do fall into the world of trafficking often get trapped. Sorry, my camera's blurry. Often get trafficked multiple times. And it's because we grow up in this environment of constant turmoil and abuse. I'm no stranger to that. First time I was ever sexually assaulted, I was only 4. It happened again and again and again throughout my teen years. But these are things that when we're really young, we're told that we're not to talk about these things. For number one, when I was sexually assaulted when I was 4, it was my older brother. When I was sexually assaulted when I was 12, it was my older brother. When you grow up in this world where you're not allowed to talk about it, and when things happen at such an early age, you suppress the memories. I didn't remember this happened until I was 26. That was while I was sitting on a friend's couch. Suddenly I burst into tears because something had triggered this memory in me. Since then, it has taken what feels like a lifetime to be able to move beyond all of this stuff that happened. But that's where it started, was on that couch. I was not okay with coming forward with this to any kind of legal authority. And of course, with the statute of limitations here in the state of Colorado, this is a real struggle. A lot of children, when they are experiencing something like this, they do suppress these memories. Not everybody comes to having that realization within the first 10 years after turning 18 years old. For those of you who aren't aware, that is the statute of limitations here in Colorado. When I was trafficked 3 different times, it happened after I turned 18. And there's a lot of people that also don't realize that that is a common thing, but only 1/4 of all victims are under the age of 18. So I think the purpose from my being here today really is just to say that the statute of limitations in criminal justice and in juvenile justice is definitely something that needs to be taken under consideration in these kinds of meetings. The statute of limitations for adult justice, the prosecutors have to start prosecuting within 18 months. When you're an 18-year-old, when you're a 19-year-old and you're sexually assaulted, or worse, if you're trafficked and you're sexually assaulted multiple times, this is another thing that you're not going to be okay with coming forward about for a very long time, if ever. Having that limitation of telling somebody, congratulations, you were brave enough to finally come forward with your story, but you didn't do it in time, is one of the most painful lessons that I've ever had to deal with. See, the last time I was ever trafficked, I was 31 years old. I was trafficked by a police officer, not in this state. And the things that were done were horrific. I'm also a victim and survivor of sport torture, something that didn't have a name until I gave it one because I didn't know how to deal with it otherwise. I could not talk about that for 8 years. And even then, only to my therapist. But because this happened to me, I can't do anything about it because I waited more than 18 months to do something. And now that I've moved beyond all of this, what I wouldn't give to be able to do something about this man who had done this to me, because I know I'm not the last. I know I wasn't the first. And he's still operating. That's all I came here to say. Thank you.
Amanda, thank you for your strength and for your comments. We do have just about 3 minutes. If I have any members of the working group who would like to ask Ms. Blackwood any questions, I'd ask you to raise your hand. Tom, I believe I see your hand up if you want to jump in, sir.
Yeah, Ms. Blackwood, obviously, thank you for sharing your story. I can't imagine what you've endured in your life. But I really want to try and do you have any input for us on not necessarily specific policy changes, but as a group comes together to consider policy changes, who should that group include? And how do you think that might work best? Should it be part of the legislature? Should it not? Should it be independent? Can you give us any thoughts on that if you have those?
It should definitely be part of the legislature. This is where we're seeing the biggest movements. It should include actual survivors who are okay with sharing their stories and have done so with a sense of authority to them. There's a lot of people that are not yet healed and in a place to be able to openly speak about their past. I do public speaking on this. I have written several books on my experiences in my life. I was on over 100 podcasts last year. I'm very comfortable talking about this. That's not going to be everybody. You need to find people that are going to be in healed spaces to be able to talk. There are several different people who run anti-trafficking or domestic violence groups that would be wonderful resources to reach out to. Here in the state of Colorado, there's a young lady by the name of Kelly Dore, D-O-R-E. She does this often. She would be wonderful to get included.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Blackwood. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Blackwood. And if you do have any written comments, as I said earlier, you'd like to submit, please do email those to us, or you can use the form to sign up and submit those. With that, I am going to move us forward to Courtney Sutton, who will be followed by Ray Harlan. And again, as Tom suggested, to the maximum extent possible, if folks can focus their answers, there will certainly be a lot of work that these future entity or entities undertake in their work. The focus of this working group is really about the structure, the mission, and where the future entity or entities reside. So Courtney, I'll hand it off to you now.
Thank you so much for taking the time to carefully consider the creation of a group reviewing criminal and juvenile justice in an evidence-based manner. My name is Courtney Sutton. I'm the Public Policy Director for the Colorado Organization for Victim Assistance, or COVA. We're a statewide coalition focused on advocating for crime victims, and COVA has had a long history with the CCJJ. The deliberate and careful reflection of the purpose and structure of this entity addressing criminal and juvenile justice is critical. COVA and our membership believes this entity should be balanced and should include victims and survivors along with victim service agencies. In Colorado, victims are afforded rights under the Victims' Rights Act, and the General Assembly made it clear that all victims and witnesses to crimes are honored and protected by law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, and judges in a manner no less vigorous than the protections afforded to criminal defendants. These protections are necessary to address the traumatic harm of victimization and the re-traumatization of the criminal justice process for many survivors. In the book, Truth and Repair, Dr. Judith Herman states, why are crime victims relegated to such a marginal role in the justice system? The answer seems to be an expectation that victims will be too angry, too irrational, and too fixated on retribution to be trusted. Anger is the most unwelcome sentiment from the crime victims who the dominant community would most prefer to ignore. Rather than ceding to common prejudices and fears about victims, a truly fair system needs to find a better way of including them in the workings of justice. And COVA asks you to include victims and survivors, to allow them to speak to their experiences and wishes, and what exactly this process looked like for them and what they hope for the future for other victims. In the creation of a new group set out to analyze evidence-based research and best practices, I hope the group will consider the origins of crime, crime prevention, rehabilitation, supportive services for victims, including healing processes, and alternatives to traditional criminal justice practices, especially for marginalized communities that feel unsafe contacting law enforcement. In the inclusion of victims and survivors into this group, the development must consider the psychological safety and re-traumatization, along with group norms for these difficult conversations, and also the barriers to attend that include transportation, meeting time, childcare, ability to take time off of work, language access, and even compensation. System-based services should not be the only voices at the table. Inclusion of subject matter experts regarding crime, and specifically crime prevention researchers, community-based nonprofits serving victims of crime, clinicians and mental health providers and educators are critical to provide a well-balanced and fair group. I believe that specialized and focused small groups, including a survivor advisory panel, will allow space for these individuals to work cohesively and make clear, concise recommendations. I also believe that the juvenile justice should be separate from adult justice review due to the large difference between those two types of crimes. A smaller group could also focus on legislation that's put forward that doesn't come from this new entity for them to review and make recommendations. When policymakers ask the question about why reporting to law enforcement is so low for specific crime types or communities, it would be helpful for us to understand what services are going to be offered if a victim doesn't report. How will they actually be able to heal from this crime along with their community? There's community resources for domestic violence, sexual violence, stalking, and human trafficking victims, but what resources are available for other crime victims that both report or don't report to law enforcement? And how are we uplifting healing and resiliency within these systems? Additionally, I believe it is crucial that victim service agencies, you have to understand that we're facing a 50% cut from federal funding through the Victims of Crime Act funding, or VOCA. This is detrimental to victims and survivors along with their communities. The inclusion of community-based victim services is necessary, but has already caused strain on staff under CCJJ, and this will be exacerbated if the state is unable to provide additional funding. As funding is often stagnant or inconsistent, innovation and developing new solutions within community-based nonprofits or even system-based agencies are limited. Current practices may not align with our evidence-based best practices or necessary reform to actually improve the lives of crime victims. The created entity should be able to put forth recommendations for policies with an eye on implementation with fidelity. Partnerships and collaboration are key to ensuring this entity is truly putting forth best practices, with implementation being a key focus. Overall, this new entity must include victims and survivors and victim service providers and take a comprehensive look at criminal justice response, crime prevention, and victim services. Thank you so much for hearing from COVA and our membership.
Thank you very much. And we do have just under 2 minutes. If we have any members of the working group who have questions, if you could use the raise your hand icon, because I can't see everybody on screen right now. Maureen, please.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sutton. I was writing very quickly to get all of your recommendations because your testimony was really, really helpful to our mission and identifying people who should be involved and issues that should be part of the mission. And I'm just wondering if you have any of your testimony in writing that we could, if you could submit it to us via email, because I thought it was very valuable and would be very helpful as we move forward. So I appreciate it.
Yes, absolutely. I can email that over.
Right. We may not get a chance to listen to the tape or transcribe it, so that would be great. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you both very much. Mr. Weissman, Representative Weissman, please. We have time for one quick question.
Thank you, Barrick. Thank you, Ms. Sutton, for your comments. I always appreciate when we are reminded in a criminal justice space that resources for survivors need to be available not just within the criminal legal system, but also in other ways. That gets a bit more to the downstream substantive policy that any group might consider, but I do think it underlines for us that when such a group might get to talking specifically about resources for survivors of crimes, we are going to need to look without the usual criminal justice policy spaces to make good on what Ms. Sutton is saying. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Representative Weissman, and thank you, Ms. Sutton. With that, we are out of time for now, but I dropped the email. You can send that to in the chat, and we will follow up. I'd like to invite Ray Harlan, who will be followed by Tim Lopez. And again, you'll see me popping on to give a 2-minute and a 1-minute warnings. To the maximum extent possible, we welcome your thoughts. We'd really appreciate your thoughts on the future entity or entities to replace what was the CCJJ, including its mission, its membership, and where it is housed. With that, Mr. Harlan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. As usual these days, I'm having some trouble with my voice. If you can't hear me, let me know and I'll start shouting. My name is Ray Harlan. I'm associated with Colorado Victims for Justice. We are a volunteer group of crime survivors who work to make the criminal justice system better for everyone. I know your time's at a premium, and I really appreciate you inviting us for these comments. I made a lengthy input online last week. I'm not going to repeat it, but I would urge you to take a look. It's got some ideas that I think you should consider. On this oral presentation, I want to make 3 points. First point, crime survivors greatly outnumber offenders in Colorado. You can understand this if you reflect on 2 ideas. One is that most offenders commit more than one crime. Second, most crimes have more than one victim. My second point, people who are connected with the criminal justice system come in 2 categories. In the first category are people who administer the system. Judges, prosecutors, law enforcement, public defenders, private defenders, parole officers, halfway house staff, and so on. Most of you in this room are in that category. The second category is composed of people who are affected by the system. 2 groups, offenders and survivors. Here's my point. If laws are written by people who administer the system without input from people who are affected by it, those laws typically have unexpected consequences. Colorado Victims for Justice has spent 12 years trying to patch holes in the Colorado legal system caused by lawmakers who got blindsided by those unexpected consequences. Things like strangulation, abuse of a dead body, and so on. I can, in answer to questions, I can give you more examples. My third point is more complex. State of New Jersey, 6 years ago, instituted pretrial reform, which eliminated cash bail in favor of a reliable assessment. That program has been wildly successful. It has greatly reduced the jail population. It has, without increasing the number of crimes committed by people released free trial. The number of people who attend hearings reliably is about the same as it was before the reform. They've recently analyzed the success of the program. Everybody likes it. Judges like it, prosecutors like it, defense attorneys like it, offenders like it, victims like it. The only people who don't like it are in the bail bond industry because it put them out of work. I have tried for several years to get lawmakers to look at that for Colorado, but there's a shortage of bandwidth. The weakness in our system is we don't have enough research staff for lawmakers. Each lawmaker is allotted $4,200 per year to spend on staff salaries. That's why so many employ interns. I can't get anyone to consider this reform because it would take a lot of work to adapt what New Jersey is doing to our very different legal system. A group like a reconstituted CCJJ could do a tremendous service by providing the research arm for bills like that, because all the stakeholders are present in this room, and you can therefore present lawmakers with a package of an analysis of a proposal like this. And I would suggest that for that to work, you have to have a different scoring system than the old CCJJ. In the old CCJJ, I'm not sure how many members you had. It was about 25, I think. But if a bill was considered in the final vote might be 11 people opposed to the bill, 7 in favor, 6 who say we can just live with it. And that would be presented to the lawmakers as the committee believes in the bill, which is misleading, and it's not very helpful because it doesn't highlight the issues. The new group should report to the lawmakers the way the Supreme Court does, where there is a majority opinion with an explanation of why the majority believe that way. Then there are one or more minority opinions that differ, also with an explanation of why they think that way, so that a lawmaker can sit down with colleagues and discuss the bill when everybody has in front of them an explanation of what's going on, of what the issues are. And that concludes my recommendations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harlan. Do we have questions from any members of the working group? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to pause for just a minute, and some of you may have seen me turning off some cameras. We do ask that if you're not a member of the working group and you're not currently presenting, that you leave your camera off so members of the working group can focus on connecting with one another and with the current presenter. With that said, I'd like to invite Tim Lopez, who will be followed by Jenny Stith. And again, I hope folks can address what is on your mind, including your personal connection with the issues at hand, any past experience with the CCJJ, and in particular, the future of any entity or entities, things like membership, composition, mission, whether it's housed in the executive or the legislative, or about your past experience with the CCJJ. With that, Mr. Lopez, I'll give the floor to you, and then we'll bring in Jenny Stith.
Thank you very much. First, Tom, let me wish all of you a happy new year, and thank you for having me on your program here today and opportunity to share my thoughts on the CCJJ. I'm a victim of crime, and I'm a family victim of crime. I went through 7 murder trials back to back and 2 death penalties with conviction back to back. Many have said, well, this crime doesn't matter. My own state representatives and senators, members of the CCJJ, and as I said, legislators. Well, because this case is 27 years old, it doesn't matter. Well, you know, there are some members on this working group, Mr. Raines and others, that may be able to address that for those of you who have that question in the back of your mind. And let me give you an example. You would not think a case that's 27 years old would be back in court. And yet, because of decisions made through the CCJJ and the legislature, as well with the Colorado Supreme Court, Colorado Court of Appeals, and the United States Supreme Court, I have been back to 2 resentencing hearings in just the last 2 years. And fortunately for me, the laws stood up and they were again convicted of murder. But my bring this point up is because victims of crime, their crimes are not outdated. They're not, shouldn't be taken advantage of, shouldn't be misconstrued that they're milking, victims are milking their case or doing this when testifying or making or sharing that information with you. At the CCJJ, do I feel victims are representative? Absolutely not. Have they ever been? No. Are victims on the board of the CCJJ or on there? No. We are a state with the VRA. The VRA gives victims rights. and yet the CCJJ has no victims. One of the problems that CCJJ and this working group struggle with, do we call them victims or do we call them survivors? We'd like to put, a square peg in a round hole. Well, I would never consider myself a survivor. I am definitely a victim. Those that do consider themselves survivors, they're victims of crime that they've survived. But I've never heard, a district attorney open would say, and now we'll hear from the survivor. They usually say, we will hear from the victim or the victim's family. So, just that piece alone is something that needs to be addressed with the CCJJ. Another piece that the CCJJ does is, when they first came about, they used to vote yes or no. There was no middle ground. And folks voted their conscience and said why they voted it. Then they mediated away from it. And then we got thumbs up, thumbs down, or thumb sideways that we could live with it. And then it was presented to the legislature, who then saw it that, well, okay, the CCJJ is good with it. So let's run this bill. Let's do this. Let's do that. Well, they would have never got that impression except for the way the CCJJ changed the voting. So, right there should say this is a problem and that we need to be voting yes or no and no in-betweens. Our system doesn't work that way. Nobody on the Supreme Court or the Court of Appeals, nobody does that. Now, getting back to my case, you would sit there and say, okay, I know I'm not the only one. I know there are plenty others. But my case has been in front of the Colorado Supreme Court 4 times. It's been in front of the Colorado Court of Appeals 8 times. And it's been in front of the United States Supreme Court 4 times. Some of the people who convicted of the crimes in my case, we've had special sessions by the state legislature and have passed new laws trying to keep those that were guilty of murder on death row because of Ring versus Arizona or, different rulings that the CCJJ and others don't really even take into consideration when we talk about Miller versus Alabama or Montgomery versus Louisiana. Well, those are all rulings that are rulings by the United States Supreme Court that affect victims. And yet we don't have victims on the CCJJ. We have a VRA. We don't have this. We have a CCJJ with voting problems. We need to correct that for the CCJJ to be effective. And for those that think victim advocates and other organizations sit there and represent victims, well, they work for the state, they work for agencies, but they don't work for victims. They do a good job in working with, but it's not quite the same as hearing directly from victims. With that, I thank you, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. And we have just over a minute. If I have members of the working group who would like to ask a question, if you'd raise your hand. Mr. Raines, please.
Tim, good to see you. Hope you're doing well. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Tom.
My biggest takeaways, and I want to make sure I got them right, was concerns about the voting process and how it was kind of watered down. And then membership, to make sure there's more inclusive membership beyond just systems folks, and definitely in terms of hearing from victims or survivors, regardless of how they view their position. And then a little bit in your early comment was, I understand there's things the legislature did and then things CCJJ recommended. I'm not sure, and one thing we're wrestling with is how to maintain legislative autonomy, but still create a valuable entity for the legislature to bounce ideas off. But are my takeaways pretty accurate from what your concerns were?
Yes, they are, Tom, and I appreciate you for listening to that detail. And I think one of the things groups should understand, and members of this working group, 27 years ago, a number of these agencies didn't exist. A number of these for-profits, nonprofits weren't there. There were not places where victims went to. You know, COVO was in its infancy. Parents of murdered children didn't exist. Voices of victims didn't exist. Colorado Victims for Justice, they didn't exist. Victims were just on their own. And to that point, victims still are on their own.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. We are unfortunately out of time. I would again welcome and invite you to send any additional remarks or any written remarks to the email we dropped, and members of the working group. If you have questions for Mr. Lopez, please send those to Carrie or me, and we will reach back out to everybody. With that, I'd like to invite Jenny Stith, who will be followed by Ashley Jellison.
Good morning. My name is Jenny Stith. I serve as Executive Director of WINGS. We support adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse and incest, or intrafamilial sexual abuse, which Amanda spoke about so courageously. And this is also my own lived experience. I have actually served on CCJJ as a victims representative for one term, ending in 2021. I was very honored to be asked to represent the needs of victims. However, I have to be honest and say that my ability to really do so on the commission felt extremely limited. I didn't have a lot of extra time to serve on committees. That was one condition to even be able to serve on the board. I just simply did not have the time. There were questions that I thought about and sometimes asked from the experiences that I carry in my role at WINGS. However, there really never seemed to be enough time to fully incorporate those into the regular business of the commission. This may be an experience that many leaders of victim service organizations share, and that's why I want to speak to it, because I think we need to really look at this as we think about problem solving. Many of us are trying to grow trauma-informed, culturally responsive organizations that can meet the needs of very vulnerable and often overlooked communities of crime victims without ample, consistent funding to do so. It's an incredibly challenging endeavor. Time spent away from our own organizations means risking keeping our doors open. We are in the same type of survival often that we're trying to help clients heal out of. When we do serve on state boards, we often find that the needs of our clients are not on the agenda. So overall, one key issue that I think those in the victim services community want to center and amplify is that there needs to be greater parity for victims of crime with those who are in the criminal justice system, along with nuanced considerations about the issues that individuals in all of these spaces are facing, especially those from marginalized communities. This would include elevated funding for victim service organizations and cultural providers specifically, so they have more sustainable operational baselines from which to serve their clients, and that allows for more meaningful engagement and true representation on all state boards that are relevant to their needs being seen, heard, and responded to in new and innovative ways. So certainly a few boards that come to mind would be CCJJ, the Crime Victim Services Board, which I also serve on. And I do see the evolution that's happening to bring in additional voices. So I want to applaud, encourage, and amplify that. But I would also include the Behavioral Health Administration as being a really important entity to bring together with these others. And I will say I have not seen the victim service community needs represented there at all, which feels really disappointing and alarming. Let me explain the reasons behind my suggestions about these entities being more integrated by centering the needs of adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse, who are 1 in 5 adults in Colorado. When it is unaddressed, a history of childhood sexual abuse presents in the adult years as symptoms with which you may be familiar, some of which have been spoken today, such as human trafficking. Many are often abused in the home first, so I really do appreciate that Amanda brought that experience forward. Also, substance misuse and abuse, mental and physical health challenges, repeated victimizations, including domestic violence and adult sexual assault, problems with parenting, enacting violence, which can lead to incarceration, and being unhoused, and also a strong link to attempted and completed suicide. There's so many, I got lost in those, I apologize. But these victims and survivors are experiencing the impacts of complex developmental trauma resulting from being harmed sexually in their childhoods by people they know, trust, and often to whom they are related. Childhood sexual abuse is unfortunately a pandemic in our culture, one that we have not fully accepted as both a children's and adult health and justice issue. Adult survivors are certainly among those who are in the criminal and juvenile justice system, yet the vast majority, as has been mentioned today, are moving through many other systems, including healthcare, behavioral health, and victim services, without being screened for this childhood crime, referred for appropriate treatment, or provided long-term specialized support to heal as adults. We simply overlooked this early crime as not mattering, when in fact it is the root of so much injury, disconnection, and disease impacting those in our state who are largely cut off from services they need to heal and thrive. Wings has gathered data through several needs assessments in recent years, hearing directly from adult survivors in Colorado about what it's like when they're reaching out for services. Most recently, we heard from adult survivors within communities of color and providers poised to serve them. These individuals are experiencing the most profound barriers to services, so their needs should be heard by leaders of the working group. Due to time limits today, I'd like to offer to share these findings of the report with you by email and offer to present them in depth if you prefer. I hope that you will see there is a profound need and an immense opportunity to bring the realities of what 1 in 5 adults in Colorado are experiencing or have experienced to reimagine and redesign systems that can facilitate the healing they need and deserve. With that, I want to underscore that we need to take racialized trauma and systemic oppression seriously and consider elevated funding to offer transformative and restorative justice services if we really want to tackle the complexities created by ideologies of white supremacy and patriarchy, which have shaped all the systems of which we are a part. These ideologies are responsible for creating issues like childhood sexual abuse and incest, which will not be solved by replicating that same consciousness. I've given you a snapshot of the needs of victims of childhood sexual abuse. This issue alone is happening at pandemic level here in Colorado. It was never a topic of focus on my time on CCJJ. So to summarize and to answer your question specifically, I don't exactly know how this all should come together. I admire the process that you're in. I do think we need to be mindful that white supremacy practices can be woven into even trying to come to an outcome. So I would love to be briefed and know more about what's being considered. And I would encourage, again, coming together and breaking down the silos between some of these other entities that have funding that could be used to support crime victims heal from the trauma from these crimes, including CSA, that's not even being tracked. And I would also say that statute of limitations reform is essential, but it will not solve the access to care problem. And we have funding that is being directed towards victim services that is crisis-based only. So there's a whole recalibration, I think, from symptom management to actually root cause that needs to happen. And I'm sorry, they're cleaning my condo in the hallway, so I will stop my time. But if you have any questions, I would love to answer those.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And unfortunately, we are at time for this block, but would welcome you sending that presentation you mentioned. You can send it to TCJJ at Confluence PSG, and we will get that out to the full group. Thank you very much for joining us today. With that, I'm next going to go to Ashley Jellison, who will be followed by Connie Brenton. I don't yet see Connie online. If you are Connie, if you'd raise your hand. If we don't have Connie, after Ashley will be Kazi Houston. But for now, I'll give the floor to Ashley Jellison, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good morning. I'm Ashley Jellison, the Executive Director of the Colorado Children's Alliance, representing the 19 Child Advocacy Centers, or CACs, throughout Colorado. Our Child Advocacy Centers provide facilities and train staff to conduct forensic interviews after an allegation of child abuse. Each CAC covers a judicial district in the state and provides wraparound services to a victim and their family, including victim advocacy, mental health treatment, and medical examinations. The CACs work hand in hand with local law enforcement and the Department of Human Services on any case of child abuse or neglect. In the time that I have been in my role, I am unaware of any interactions between either the CACs or the Colorado Children's Alliance and the CCJJ. Based on the enabling legislation in 2007, the legislative declaration notes that ensuring public safety and respecting victims' rights are paramount concerns of Colorado citizens. We believe this is still true today. As you know, the commission was to include a representative of a victims' rights organization, a member who was a victim as defined by statute, a victim's advocate, and an expert in juvenile justice issues. We support the representation of victims and juvenile justice expertise on the CCJJ and any organization working on criminal justice reform in the future. Unfortunately, we noticed that both the victim of crime and the juvenile justice expert positions were vacant on the CCJJ. Any entity in the future must ensure that the victims' voices and juvenile justice expertise are included. CCA would like to be included during these considerations and as a resource for future appointments. The Colorado Children's Alliance, or CCA, for 30 years has collaborated with local communities to strengthen responses to child abuse and neglect. We are the statewide membership nonprofit agency for CACs in Colorado. We work with our CACs to fight to end all forms of child abuse through professional intervention, high quality and evidence-based prevention, and medical and mental health care. We are well equipped and eager to work with any organization in the future to offer our expertise in these advocacy areas. In relation to the creation of a new entity, we believe juvenile and criminal justice reform in our fast-paced world is always evolving. We support having a collaborative organization that brings many perspectives and voices to the discussions on enhancements to public safety while ensuring justice and protecting victims' rights. We appreciate others who have testified in front of the TCJJ in previous sessions that feel the juvenile justice discussions and reform need to be independent from overall criminal justice. We agree that juveniles and adults vary drastically in their involvement within the criminal justice system. However, having two separate systems is short-sighted and will have negative consequences. Often, a child may be tried as an adult due to the nature of an offense. Other times, a person is legally an adult, but through various situational circumstances may experience the juvenile justice system versus adult proceedings. Criminal justice is not black and white. Many decisions made as an offender processes through the justice system are conceptual interpretations. Two separate systems can result in siloed decision-making that may result in a disparity of offender and victim rights. Whatever entity is created, we believe that the statutory mission should be to ensure protection of the rights and needs of victims related to crime in the criminal justice system, with a priority to prevent and reduce crime and recidivism. We do not have a preference for where the entity is housed. However, a venue that provides for victim engagement is critical. We also support the creation of any entity that would include many different perspectives, both lived experiences and expertise through professions and associations. We support the cost-effective use of public resources and evidence-based recidivism reduction initiatives. We also would encourage a new entity to incorporate the collection of data and analysis of that data as policies and practices are developed. Transparency is critical for this type of entity, especially when many voices from broad perspectives might impact rules, regulations, and laws. The intricate workings of any entity going forward should provide avenues for public engagement at every level. In relation to the entity making its own recommendations, we feel that the intrinsic nature of the entity will be independent due to the diverse makeup of members of a new entity. Thank you for hearing from the Colorado Children's Alliance and its membership.
Thank you very much, Ashley. We do have just over 2 minutes. If we have members of the group, Tom, I see your hand up. Please jump in.
Yeah, Miss Johnson, thank you. Jellison, sorry, I didn't have my glasses on. I should know better. You hit a really significant failure in CCJJ, and it wasn't for lack of effort there on the victim representative. And I'd like your thoughts on, how CCJJ might have done better in trying to find someone willing to fill that role, because I know there were some victim survivor groups who followed CCJJ and were present at meetings and tracked the agendas and knew that the commission was looking for a representative, but we could never get one to come forward. I know it's a big ask. And then in conjunction with that, over the 3 full days of public comment now, I've heard every now and then I hear someone with one of those policy groups or a community group say, I never heard of CCJJ. How do we get that message out more? Because anyone who was involved in any legislation over the last 15 years in criminal justice did know about CCJJ. So we need to bring more people into the arena. What are your thoughts on how we capture more folks?
I understand the problem completely. We have that same concern. We like to have the voices of those who have lived experience. Finding victims is always a challenge, but we do want to help in that way as a resource. We've got plenty of CACs. We've got 19 across the state, and all of them have have clients with lived experience that we would be very happy to help as a resource.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jellison. With that, if you've got additional comments that you would like to submit, we welcome those. And members of the working group, if you have more questions for Ms. Jellison, please send those over and we're happy to circulate them. With that, I am going to move on. I don't see our next guest, Connie Brenton, which means when Connie joins, we'll bring them in. So with that, I'm going to move to Kazi Houston, who will be followed by John Nislaj. And if I pronounced either of your names wrong, please do correct me when you get on screen and accept my apology.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. My name is Kazi Houston. I'm the legal director at the Rocky Mountain Victim Law Center. RMVLC provides free legal services to crime victims across Colorado, including providing legal representation to victims of crime in criminal cases to uphold their rights under the Victim Rights Act. We also regularly file as amicus curiae in appellate cases that impact VRA issues in our state. I had the opportunity to sit on the Sentencing Reform Task Force of the CCJJ, as well as on multiple working groups through that task force. The robust conversations that occurred at the working group level in particular ensured thoughtful decisions were made as policy recommendations were discussed and developed. This was largely done by drawing on the expertise of stakeholders and participants who often didn't sit on the task force or CCJJ, but had important information to provide. The voice of victims in those spaces, as well as the expertise of advocates and VRA legal experts, ensured the impact of policy changes on victims of crime, their families, and their rights was more completely understood by everyone in the process. Often the position or interest of victims is assumed to be reflected by law enforcement and prosecution sitting at collaborative tables or system-based advocates who have a very specific role in the legal system. However, that is not always the case. Victims' legal rights and interests are distinct from those of the state, and the lived experience of victims and survivors who've been through the criminal legal system and those of confidential community-based advocates is tremendously important and informative. As policy changes are considered in the criminal legal system, hearing from victims and victim representatives who have actually participated in criminal cases, parole hearings, plea conversations, and trials offers a perspective that can't be duplicated by any other participant. This experience is also very different in the juvenile and adult systems, and it's my recommendation that those be separate processes, both of which include victim experiences and victim legal rights. In addition to this, I think it's essential that access is provided for people with lived experiences who are willing to participate in this process. Going to Tom's prior question, I think things like scheduling meetings outside of regular business hours in community-based locations and providing language access and compensation would go a long way to ensure that more voices are included in these conversations. We've absolutely seen in Colorado the impact of victims and survivors who have had huge impact in policy changes and efforts, and I think some of those procedural changes would increase that access and those voices. Unfortunately, in my experience on the Sentencing Reform Task Force, the victim voice was often distilled as things moved to the task force and CCJJ as a whole, and it did often seem like the perspective of victims was overshadowed by the more vocal and traditional views of the prosecution and the defense, when it is actually a unique and important perspective. On a procedural note, the Sentencing Reform Task Force packaged together sets of recommendations for a complete up or down vote. Doing this meant if there was a single problematic measure, any objection to the measure was lost in the final vote of a packaged recommendation. This process meant legitimate concerns brought by individual stakeholders were more likely to be lost in the collaborative process. It's my recommendation this be addressed in the revision of the CCJJ. I would also like to see only people who are able to vote to have voting positions. Commission members making recommendations as important as the ones that come from processes like these should be required to take positions based on the information they receive as a member, and those votes, as well as all meetings, should be accessible to the public. I'm happy to take any questions with my remaining few minutes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Houston. We do have about 5 minutes. We have members of the working group who would like to ask questions. I could ask you to use the raise your hand because I cannot see all 40 plus people on screen at this point. Kazi, Maureen Kane, please, Madam Chair.
Good morning, Kazi. I'd like to ask you about your position about voting as a group, as a block, or voting on individual issues, because that was always, you know, that may not be a statutory matter, in our recommendation, or something to be captured there. But are you suggesting that when like a sentencing reform task force gets together and says, these are 50 different felonies that we want to classify up or down, that each be dealt with? Or because a lot of times, as you know, it's there's a little compromise in this whole process to reach balance, and what your thoughts are about that, and how the victim voice should be used to impact that.
No, I appreciate the question. I think there are certainly things that can go together, as you know, from the Sentencing Reform Task Force, if we're looking at a whole grid of, 50 misdemeanor crimes, it might make sense to address those together. But I do think that we did see times where bigger issues were packaged together as kind of everyone is yay or everyone is nay, you have to pick. So it might be some of these issues seem fine for the good of the whole, maybe we'll support it, but some of those important stakeholder views got lost. And I think particularly the victim voice that is often, one or two people at the table is the one that can get overlooked, or there's, a little bit of a pressure to compromise and saying for the greater good of the whole versus really trying to prioritize the position of victim representatives, saying the rights of victims, the experience of victims should be as important as any other thing, and ensuring that that is reflected in the final vote. The specific example I had with that was around some of the PAWPO recommendations. I took a very public position in meetings and conversations that we opposed that, but at the end of the day, we had to vote for it, even though that was contrary to the position that I believed in, because the greater packaging. And so I think there are times where there is more dissent, that there might be a way to do a vote that reflects that a little better. So as it then moves up to other bodies, they have more context on what actually the concerns were that were raised by everyone, rather than just seeing it's a unanimous yes vote.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Kazi. I don't see any other questions this time. As I've said several times, Ms. Houston, if you'd like to submit additional written comments, we welcome those, and I'll ask your indulgence. If members of this group have questions for you, we may follow up with you, but greatly appreciate you joining. In just a minute, I'm going to bring on Connie Brenton, and then we'll bring on John Nislaj. And again, my apologies if I'm getting any names wrong. I will also, as we approach the hour, the halfway mark for this meeting, remind that we are reserving, in addition to those who signed up to testify, we have time blocked at the end of this meeting at about 10:50 for any members of the public who have joined who had not previously signed up. If you are a member of the public who would like to address the TCJJ, I would ask that you send a chat message to myself, Barrick Abramson, or my colleague Carrie Steele, and we'll be sure to go to you when we have that block. With that, I'd like to invite Connie Brenton to join. Connie, if you're on and you could start your camera and unmute yourself, we are ready to have you on.
There we go. Hi there. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am from Boulder, Colorado, born and raised, and have had a business on the Pearl Street Mall for 30 plus years. And so I spent quite a bit of time in downtown Boulder, and we have a team of about 15, primarily college students. We have been seeing an increase in the amount of crime, and so much so that actually everybody on our staff has been a victim of some kind of crime. And I would say it's getting a little better, but we are seeing probably 3 or 4 times a week. We're still needing to call the police. And an example of the most recent is we had somebody outside the store screaming, "Fuck the police, fuck the police." And I called again, and they said, okay, they would be down, that they had already gotten another phone call. This is from a person who was, the person that we called about is a known inhabitant on the mall, and has physically and personally threatened our store managers to the point where we have had to bring trainers in for safety. We have had to bring psychologists in to manage some of the traumatic moments that they regularly endure. It's something that we can't really overlook, but this is the victim minority that is just not being heard about. So these college students, when I'm talking to them about speaking to their peers in order to create a more safe community, nobody's really willing to talk about it. And so what ultimately happens over time is the bar gets raised. And so our tolerance level for crime and shoplifting and abuse goes up. We have had members of our staff cut. We have had, well, it's just a regular occurrence. It's just a regular occurrence. In fact, every time I go into the store, I have to make the statement, do not let anybody that you think could be dangerous past this certain point. It becomes so dangerous beyond that point because we can't get them out. We can't get them out of the store. And because nothing really happens, the people who are coming into the store and who are being abusive are empowered and feel emboldened. So the one that happened about, I don't know, 10 days ago or so, and I called the police, I had asked him to leave. I said, will you please leave? And he went berserk. We've had people go berserk in the store and start throwing things across the store and at people. And I called, this time I called 911 and I said, I can't get him out. He won't leave. He's not leaving. He's being disruptive. The tourists and our customers are feeling nervous and uncomfortable. And it just continues. So I just want to just make it clear to you that there are the people who are working in the stores downtown, all of them have been victimized, personally victimized, whether that means in the store or whether we've had the cars of our employees' windows have been broken. They're scared to go to their car at night. So there's a whole group of people who are being impacted by the fact that we are allowing behaviors that earlier simply weren't allowed. They were against the law and they were enforced. So I'll open it up for questions.
Thank you, Connie. We do have just about 1 minute if we have members of the working group with questions. Mr. Rains, I'll go to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Brenton, and I'm sorry for what you've endured. I can tell it's exceedingly frustrating. But I'm hoping that everything you're talking about are legitimate issues for any new group to pursue. Do you have any thoughts on how to get the concerns you're expressing involved in forming? What we're trying to do is put together a group that will then allow for consideration of policies. So are you asking that the voice of, whether it's retail owners or another community group be involved?
Absolutely, you need to include people from the business community. Here's the other thing that's happening is that we think we're enduring it alone. And then downtown Boulder will have a meeting together and they're like, and our neighbors. Well, now I have a small group that we actually keep very close. It's like a neighborhood watch. But people up the street are like, oh my God, that happens to you too? I'm thinking, yeah, we're same community, same issues, but we don't even speak well to each other. So absolutely this group needs to take into consideration, because we have daily data points. We have a lot of information over a long period of time. So we can also share the pattern that we are seeing. And we can tell you at any moment in time what it looks like and whether or not we are getting whether there's any progress. I won't go into details, but there are certain instances that the police will be more present. Anyway,
Great.
it's a very good community to tap into.
Thank you.
It's a good question. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Rain. Thank you, Connie. We are at time. I would, as with everybody else, invite you to submit further written comments to this group and invite all members who are joining us to present, or members of the public who plan to speak or who are just listening in. If you've got thoughts on the future of the CCJJ, including issues like your past experience with the CCJJ, your thoughts on how it should be structured, membership, its mission, or where it should be housed, we welcome you submitting those by email as well. With that, I'm next going to go to John Neslaj. John, if I'm pronouncing your last name wrong, I apologize. After John will be Dana Walter Flores.
Thank you, Barrick. No, you were close. It's Neslaj. So, but hey, look, I take no offense. I get it. It happened all the time in school. So, thank you for allowing me to speak to you all today. My name's John Neslaj, and my family and I have been residents of Boulder since 2016. I'm here today representing my family, which includes two teenagers, now aged 15 and 17, one of whom was victimized 2 years ago in the downtown Boulder Public Library. That sounds sort of artificially sterile and sanitized. So what does it really mean? Specifically, she was sexually assaulted by a 4-time convicted registered sex offender. Let that sink in for a moment. She had just turned 15 and was a freshman at Boulder High School. She wanted a quiet place on a Tuesday afternoon to study and do her homework, and made a good choice to walk to what she expected, as did we as her parents, would be a safe space. It's a perversion of our public trust and a social contract that a child going to a public library should be dangerous, much less circulating in the few blocks between Boulder High School and the public library in the general downtown Boulder area. I share the opinion of a great many concerned parents in Boulder and the surrounding communities. I have been intimately involved with a large number of parents because we had a ballot initiative here in Boulder this last election cycle called Safe Zones for Kids, specifically prompted by how dangerous the area around the local high school had become. There are numerous instances of this. This isn't, I'm not here to be a polemicist, or you can go and verify this reading numerous articles between the high school being encircled by encampments, or someone that was impaired by methamphetamine driving a stolen van within a couple hundred feet of the school and attempting to run over people. This was just a few months ago. How does that crime, of course, had a very significant impact on our lives here. I don't want to get into the particulars of it because it's being actively criminally prosecuted at the moment, but I would like to share with you the protracted nature of it. This happened in March of 2022, and it took a great deal of effort on my part and persistence and bravery on the part of my then 15-year-old daughter to lean into this push and finally, over 1 year later, result in the arrest of the perpetrator. That's how we know, I can say with a certainty of his background, because we are at the moment working with the county, the DA's office, specifically the Sex Crimes Prosecution Group, to try to bring this person to justice and provide a safe, better environment or safety for other families and other innocent families that have no idea this person continues to circulate amongst us here. I have not been involved with the CCJJ before, but I would certainly like to be more engaged in any future organization. I was not familiar with it before this, but hearing about the governor's executive order creating it, TCJJ, I reviewed their website and became a lot more educated. I was disappointed to read that the House Judiciary Committee voted to postpone indefinitely the bill that would reauthorize the commission. I think it's extremely important to get the perspective of victims in whatever organization is constituted and moves forward. When crime rates in our communities are out of control, an organization that incorporates protections of victims' rights is critical. I was very happy to learn one of the guiding principles there of the CCJJ was that public safety should always be paramount in our thoughts. This is key. It is not some theoretical exercise when your children, your families, or elderly parents are out circulating, whether going to the library, a park, or just walking along a pedestrian mall like Pearl Street here in Boulder. It's becoming increasingly difficult to simply engage with public spaces. I have presented to our city council, so I'm very familiar with it. And I can tell you that the main municipal building where they sit is surrounded by an open and notorious drug use and illegal camping. So what first-time victim or aggrieved citizen would want to walk through that when they're unfamiliar with the area in general to come and deliver comments to council? Oftentimes, people that are victimized, like my family, are embarrassed, ashamed, or overwhelmed, or maybe even too busy to deal with it. I've had the good fortune, I suppose, if you want to call that silver lining, to lean into this, to push, to use my resources, my relationships, and I happen to be an attorney. So my understanding of both civil and criminal processes to lean into this, to push and to try to advocate for change, because it's not acceptable that the vast majority of families here are completely unsuspecting, as I would guess would be the case in your communities around the state. Most people don't think that this is going to happen if they allow their child to go to a library, or here in Boulder, my kids can't ride their bike places. We have to find rides for them because bicycle theft is so prevalent. It's a big impact. Public restrooms are closed or oftentimes severely restricted because of all the illegal drug use that goes on around here. And we know it's complex, it's multi-factor, and that's all well and good, but we still have to exist. My kids still have to grow up. Now, all the children are still growing up now, right now, not like while we think about it, while we work on it for the next 2 years, 1 year, whatever it is. So in conclusion, I would say victims' rights and protection should be one of the key elements of any entity in the future. Victims advocates and victims themselves should be included in membership positions of any future entity. Victims relive the tragedy each time they discuss their experiences, or in our case, the over 2 years it will take before we even get to trial. So while it might be challenging to find victims willing to participate in an entity, there are many organizations with access to victims. It's also healing for victims to share their lived experiences, or I'll say for me to advocate, because I don't like being victimized. I don't like being bullied. I want to push back. So I encourage the entity that addresses criminal justice reform to include our voices and advocate organizations. Pursuing our perspectives are critical. Thank you very much for your time today, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Nesledge. And you actually hit exactly at the 7-minute mark, so I'm going to thank you for staying within that time. With that, if you have further comments you'd like to submit in writing, I'd invite you to email them to us, and we would ask that any members of the working group who have further questions for John, email them and we'll do our best to follow up. With that, our next two speakers will first be Dana Walter Flores with the National Youth Law Center, followed by Megan Baker with Disability Law Colorado. Dana, I invite you and thank you for joining us.
Thanks very much. Hopefully everyone can hear me. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to speak with the working group. My name is Dana Flores, and I am part of the Colorado Youth Justice Collaborative. The Youth Justice Collaborative is a multi-generational coalition of people who have been directly impacted by the juvenile justice system in Colorado. We come together both to share information and to build capacity in people and organizations to create and influence youth justice policy. Since 2020, the Youth Justice Collaborative has grown to over 120 members, representing dozens of organizations across the state. We are students and educators. We are social workers and mental health providers. We are organizers and advocates. We are public servants and people recovering from addiction. We are trauma specialists. We are formerly incarcerated people. We are survivors of crime. We are people who have caused harm and people who have helped to repair harm. We are pastors and mentors. We are undocumented people, and we are medical professionals. We are middle schoolers. Last year, I had the opportunity to speak with the CCJJ as they considered whether to revisit the issue of raising the minimum age of juvenile court jurisdiction. After 2 years of rather heated debate on that subject, there appeared to be an emerging consensus that such a change was at least possible given the right resources. The CCJJ ultimately decided not to take up that issue. That being said, in my time spent in CCJJ meetings, I was impressed by the dedication of the members to deeply interrogate each issue they considered. I was also impressed by the camaraderie and collaboration evident among the members in the CCJJ. That being said, it felt to me that the CCJJ was a body primarily focused on adult criminal justice policy. And if I may speak frankly here, I will share that I heard a couple of members of the CCJJ make comments along the lines of, I'm not even sure why we have the word juvenile in our title. We don't take up juvenile justice issues all that frequently. Or at the moment, that isn't really our area of expertise. That is not to say that the CCJJ didn't ever do good work in juvenile justice. It was just my experience interacting with members of the CCJJ in the past couple of years. I personally feel that I'm not in a position to advise the governor or the governor's office as to whether they should revive the CCJJ and call it by another name. It's clear to me that the governor feels that there is value in the CCJJ, and we have heard testimony from many representatives of law enforcement and system actors who said that they found value in that forum. What I can speak to is the need to bifurcate the subject matter. Children and adults are different. The mission of the adult criminal justice system is different from the mission of the juvenile justice system. In addition to being part of the Colorado Youth Justice Collaborative, I'm also an attorney and policy specialist with the National Center for Youth Law. In that capacity, I am in my second year of co-facilitating a youth justice policy fellowship here in Colorado for young people ages 17 to 26 who have lived experience in Colorado's juvenile justice system. These young people are the experts. Should there be a commission on juvenile justice, these young people or other young people like them should serve on it. I know that this task force has posed questions, this working group rather, has posed questions about how best to engage directly impacted youth and directly impacted people. What I can share is that at the National Center for Youth Law and our youth justice team, we have not had a difficult time engaging directly impacted youth in Colorado. In fact, last year when we opened applications for this fellowship, we had over 30 qualified applicants, and we were only able to accept half that number. So we have 14 youth fellows because we had limited funding to be able to do what is essential to engage directly impacted people and community in this work, which is compensate them adequately for their time. We do not convene the fellowship during work or school hours for the young people involved. We expect them to complete their work when it's convenient for them. In other words, they fit it in around their work, their lives, their families. They understand what's expected of them, and they not only meet those expectations, they exceed them. They are compensated at a rate of $30 per hour. And we also subsidize transportation and food as needed and event costs. Each youth fellow is expected to design and advance their own policy idea aimed at building a more fair and effective youth justice system in Colorado. To give you some examples of what they're up to, one youth fellow last year organized 45 students who had experienced expulsion because of their contact with the juvenile justice system to compose and deliver testimony on a bill aimed at reducing expulsions for nonviolent conduct that has no relationship to the safety of students or school staff. Another youth fellow took a position as a legislative aide and spent the entire session educating her peers about upcoming committee hearings to make it easier for them to participate in hearings that covered topics that directly impacted them or their families. Another fellow organized and staged an art show that featured artwork created by justice system involved youth that represented their vision for what justice policy should look like in Colorado. This year, one of our youth fellows has recently joined the Colorado Youth Detention Continuum Advisory Board, finally filling the spot allocated for a youth with lived experience that has remained vacant for quite some time.
Dana, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to wrap this up. I can give you about 20 seconds for any closing
Sure.
thoughts here. Thank you.
I'm right at the end. My point is this. Any commission designed to advise and inform our legislature on how best to address safety and justice for children and youth must be led by people who have experienced the youth justice system in collaboration with adults with subject matter experience. That is my recommendation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Dana. We appreciate you joining us, and I'll invite you, as I have with others, if you'd like to submit either your full written remarks or additional thoughts to this group, we're happy to circulate that to the full working group for the TCJJ members. I'm happy to pass questions along to Dana as well. With that, I am going to move on. Our next couple of speakers will have Megan Baker from Disability Law Colorado. After Megan, we will take a very short 4 or 5 minute break to give everybody a quick opportunity to stretch and refresh. Following that break, after Ms. Baker, we have representatives from the Colorado Providers Association. COPA, I don't have names associated with your presentation, so if you are here representing COPA, if you could drop myself and or Carrie Steele a message in the chat so we can be sure to spotlight you at that time. With that, Megan, I give the floor to you.
Thank you so much. Megan Baker with Disability Law Colorado. It's good to be here today. Good to see some familiar faces. I'm here today to talk about my experiences working with various criminal justice task forces, committees, boards, things like that, to just kind of share what I've seen work and what I've seen not work as well. I am the Facilities and Community Integration Team Leader at Disability Law Colorado. We are the protection and advocacy agency for the state of Colorado, meaning that we're charged with protecting the rights of people with disabilities. My team is in facilities a lot, which tends to mean that I spend a lot of time working within and around the criminal justice system. I've also worked as a guardian ad litem for court-involved youth and as a public defender working with juveniles and adults. In the more than 10 years that I've been practicing in Colorado, I don't think that I've ever personally interacted with the CCJJ. I certainly have heard of it, but what I do have are experiences with other groups that I'd like to share. So some of the committees and worker groups that I've been on include the Transition Stakeholder Advisory Committee, the Behavioral Health Transformational Task Force, which was the one that met to decide how to spend ARPA money on behavioral health. The Competency Fines Committee, I also just finished chairing the Colorado Jail Standards Commission. And I've worked on a couple of bills that have gone through the BHDCJJS, the committee with the long name, that looks at juvenile and criminal justice issues. When I think of what of these ventures have been successful, I think that the first thing is having a specific task or issue, because there are specific people with certain expertise depending on the issue. Both the Behavioral Health Transformational Task Force and Jail Standards, those are two good examples of relatively discrete scopes that were tackled by those groups. Even within the criminal justice system, different people have experience in different areas. So for example, when we did the Jail Standards Commission, we had representatives from sheriff's offices, as opposed to maybe just law enforcement generally, because sheriffs are the ones who run county jails. We also had not just mental health staff generally or mental health professionals, but mental health professionals that had experience working in jails. I agree that there's a huge differences between the adult and juvenile systems that warrant independent examination. And like even within my own agency, if we're talking about conditions in a facility for adults, that's probably me. If we're talking about DYS, now we have a different team that handles youth issues. So I think it's important to be specific about what you're doing and have the right people there for the right conversation. I also want to emphasize the importance of having sort of the boots on the ground as opposed to what I call, maybe sort of ivory tower people. I've done both. I tell people sometimes I'm in a position to sit in the ivory tower and philosophize about, how things might impact communities or various issues. But it's important to have people who see on the ground what that actually looks like as well. And that was critical when we did the Jail Standards Commission. The last round of review, we literally had just multiple people who work in jails, sheriff's office staff, and it was hugely beneficial. Another thing that I think has helped things be successful is that they be time limited. I found that deadlines push decisions. Even with the Jail Standards Commission, we had almost 18 months, so it was a fairly long timeline. But I can assure you that we could have discussed those indefinitely forever. There were some minute points we could have discussed for days and days. But having that timeline hanging over us kept us to a schedule and made us come to decision points. And I think that that's critical when doing this work. It also helps to think outside the box because you have a limited amount of time to get all your ideas out and discussed. Another factor is that these efforts are community-led and include and elevate the voices of lived experience. And I just want to emphasize that, professionals who work with people with lived experience, that's great. That's not a substitute, though, for the actual people with lived experience. It's important that these groups reflect the diversity of the populations impacted by the issues. And as was discussed earlier, sometimes it takes extra effort to meaningfully engage people with lived experience. And that means assisting with transportation, working around work schedules and childcare, providing compensation. But it's important to do those things so that they feel welcome, feel like their opinions are valued, and they're part of the conversation. The last point that I'll hit on is that I think it's been helpful to have shared goals and parameters to drive the work. I think of the Competency Fines Committee, we're sort of charged with finding things that are innovative. And with the Behavioral Health Transformational Task Force, things that were transformative. My best experience with this, again, is the Jail Standards Commission. We started off our discussion deciding how we want to refer to the people that we're talking about who are experiencing incarceration. And that's what we settled on, was persons experiencing incarceration as opposed to inmate or offender. And I found that having that discussion early on really framed the rest of our work. And in hindsight, I think it would have been good to do more of that, sort of establishing values early on. But we did include those in our final report to the legislature. So those are just some of the highlights of my experiences, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, and thank you all for your time.
Thank you very much, Megan. And unfortunately, we are at time for your presentation. I would welcome you submitting your written comments if you'd like, or additional thoughts. And members of the working group, if you have questions for Megan Baker and the perspective that Megan brings, please send them over and we'll reach out to Megan for those. With that, we are going to take a very short break. I've got 10:29. We're going to take exactly 5 minutes, which means at 10:34 precisely, we will start back up. Our next speakers will be, we're scheduled to have 2 speakers from the Colorado Provider Association. If you are those members, if you would message me, Barrick Abramson, so that we can be sure to highlight you, and or Carrie Steele. We'll go to COPA. Then following COPA, we'll go to Stacy and or Ashley from Breakthrough. But we'll be on a break until 10:34. Thank you all very much. For those of you listening, but with your cameras off during the break, we will be starting back up in exactly 2 minutes. I'd also invite any members of the public who would like to address the group. We'll have that block following 2 additional speaker blocks. If you would like to speak to the group, if you would send me, Barrick Abramson, a message using the chat function with your name and any affiliation, we'll bring you in during that public comment. John Longhill, I do already have you down, and we'll call you during the public comment.
Thank you.
If I could ask Terry and Tiffany from COPA to turn your cameras on, we will get you spotlighted. And in 1 minute, we will invite you into the conversation. Appreciate you both joining us. Okay, I've got 10:34, which means it is time for us to be back in session. We now are going to welcome Terry and Tiffany from the Colorado Providers Association. We appreciate you both joining us and look forward to your thoughts, in particular, any thoughts you want to offer this working group on transforming criminal and juvenile justice on your experience with the CCJJ in the past, as well as the future structure of this entity, including its mission, where it's housed, whether that's in the legislature, the executive, key things you want us to think about when it comes to the structure and membership. But with that, I'll turn the floor over to Terry and Tiffany and appreciate you both joining us.
Thank you so much. Tiffany, do you want to go or would you like me to go?
You go ahead, Terry.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Terry Smith, and I've been in recovery since August 9th of 2005. I was so honored to be invited to the Colorado Criminal and Juvenile Justice Reform Coalition meetings early in my recovery and career as a counselor. Was not very familiar with policy and the way that government works. I was excited to share my experiences and help with reform. I've been in county jails, halfway houses, treatment programs, 4 and 5 treatment programs, halfway houses, treatment programs, and finally prison, ironically on August 9th of 2005. For me, wasn't it cool that they were going to allow me to be a part of the conversation? And so I drove to the place where we were having the meetings. The room was very large. I was probably 2 or 3 years in recovery at the time. There was a table in the middle of the room. There were 8-foot tables set up in a square. There were microphones. There were name tags. And there was a person helping you who you are, tell who you are, and then they would help you find your seat. I was informed that I was a community member and that my seat is on the outside of the microphones and, you know, the decision pit. We're not speaking, we're listening. We're listening to public defenders, district attorneys, probation officers, parole officers, the Department of Corrections, community corrections make decisions. We get to talk when they're all done. We can line up to meet and speak with any of them after the meeting. I didn't really, at the time, because I was so new in recovery, I didn't really understand that I had been trying to get sober since 1997. And so 1995. And so I was a little bit used to, hey, this is a consequence of you being a person who uses drugs and alcohol. You're kind of second. And these guys and these girls, they know what to do, and then you get to bring that information back to your treatment program, or you can line up and you can say, hey. So I asked, well, when does the recovery community, when do we get to speak? How do I get my voice on here? And I was told that we have a representative. We have, the recovery community that's one representative who has a seat at the microphone, and we can get with him, and then he could bring it up if he feels like it. If that's something that he feels is pertinent, he'll bring it up. Guess how many district attorneys were there? Any and every, from every county, public defender, every county, district attorney, every county, Department of Corrections, how many ever. The guy who denied me parole, he was at the meeting. So yet again, sort of a place where you get to listen, to what's going to happen to you, don't really get to chime in real time. I'm not sure why we were invited to come. We didn't get to share any ideas or give any feedback until after the meeting. It was clear to me that people in charge of me did not believe in me. They didn't think I could heal. They didn't think I would ever succeed. The guy who's holding a sign on the ramp at I-25 today could very well be sitting here with us a year from now. And if we don't have people in positions who believe that, what are we doing? Thank you very much. We dress up, we show up, hope that you'll believe in us. We want to help. I want to thank Colorado. I think we've done some amazing things over the past 10 years. I really appreciate what you've done to help reduce stigma. I still think we have quite a ways to go. And thank you for letting me be a voice this morning.
Thank you so much, Terry. That was amazing. Thank you all for letting me be here and share. I'm Tiffany Cuvede. I am a person in long-term recovery. I am a person in recovery from substance abuse disorder since March 10th, 2014. And I'm also a person in recovery from domestic violence, sexual abuse, and mental illness. And I share these things because I am also a person who did experience some incarceration, and now I'm a person who is able to use my recovery journey to help other people. And so I am able to sit on some task forces. I sit on some task forces that really help people struggling with intimate partner violence. And I noticed too on some of the task forces, there is a lot of professionals. And when I introduce myself, I always say I'm a person with lived experience, and I'm always the only one. And I know I'm not the only one who has experienced these things at these tables, but I'm the only one to share it.
Tiffany, you've accidentally muted yourself.
Oh, how strange. I'm so sorry. Thank you for letting me know. I am a person who has the lived experience of being in recovery, being in the criminal justice system, and I'm a person who helps run a large organization in my recovery. And so it's incredibly important for people who have the lived experience to have a voice on task forces, because somebody who has experienced incarceration knows what it's like to come out of jail, have no job, not have anywhere to live, and have a list of things that you have to do, but you don't have a driver's license or a car, so you can't get to those things. And I share this because it's just so important for the people who the task forces are created to help to actually be able to be helped by the task force. So as a person with lived experience on the task forces I sit on, I am able to bring the experience. I'm able to bring a point of view of somebody who has struggled with mental health, somebody who has struggled with substances, somebody who has struggled with incarceration and been able to heal and find recovery. So thank you so much. I just wanted to hop on today and share a little bit about that and why it is so incredibly important for people with lived experience to be able to sit on these panels and these task forces to help give that real lived experience of what people need to be able to recover. So thank you so much for your time and your energy today.
Thank you, Tiffany and Terry, for your willingness to speak to this group. We do have just about a minute if I've got any members of the work group that have a question for either of our guests. Okay, seeing none, I'm going to thank you both for being here. If there's any additional thoughts you'd like to submit in writing, we welcome that. You can email them to us at tcjj@confluencepsg. And you probably also heard from my colleague, Carrie. You can email her directly. We really appreciate both of you. Up next, we've got representative or representatives from Breakthrough. Stacy and Ashley, I'm not clear if it's both of you, Whichever ones of you, if I could get you to turn your cameras on, and Carrie will add you to the spotlight. So we will go to Stacy or Ashley. Following them, we will have a brief moment for some public comment. At this point, the only individual I have signed up is John Longhill. So we'll go to John Longhill. Following that public comment, we'll have Ed Wood and then Demetrius Somerville. Stacy, I'm going to go ahead and give the floor to you, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Hi, everyone. My name is Stacy Putka. I'm the executive director of Breakthrough. If it's possible to get screen sharing permission, I'd love to share my screen at some point during the presentation. I also have with me today Ashley First. She is our director of business development and community engagement with Breakthrough. I'll give a little bit of background before I kind of dive into the testimony today. The headline of what I want to talk to you all about is working to build a more robust pathway to parole via collaboration with community partners like Breakthrough, specifically through the Department of Corrections during incarceration, to help people get out and stay out, and be safer for the community. So as I said, I'm the executive director for Breakthrough. Prior to that, I was a mental health and substance use clinician within the community corrections system. I was invited to give testimony today by Ubaldo Chavez, so thank you, Ubaldo, for the opportunity. And in order to understand a little bit more about my testimony and about the pathway to parole, I want to share a little bit about Breakthrough, so we're all kind of coming at this from the same lens and everyone understands what our experience has been. Thank you for the screen sharing permissions. So I've got this for you guys. I hate wasting time on tech stuff, but give me just 1 second to present. There we go.
And Stacy, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just going to ask, given our limited time, if you're going to share anything, if you could really focus on the targeted questions from this group around the mission, the structure, and any involvement you've had with CCJJ, just because we've got such limited time to dig into these questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So quick overview of Breakthrough. We're a 501c3 organization that focuses on transforming the lives of the incarcerated population and shifting the community's perception of the incarcerated population. We've worked inside the DOC since 2017 and are very grateful for their partnership and their collaboration. This is a little bit of our program model. I'm not going to dive into it. This is more for your use after, if this is helpful. But the main headline here is we start working with folks while they're inside to address their criminogenic needs that are the underlying root cause of their incarceration. And then we continue to work with them in community, focusing on community stability and support and job readiness. That model has worked for us so far. 86% of people who've gone through our program inside have continued to engage with us post-release, which has been really, really helpful and exciting. So using that experience and our experience working within the department since 2017 is kind of the headline of the feedback we'd like to give today, which is building a more robust pathway to parole via individualized improvement plans. So understanding the underlying causes of why people became incarcerated. And this is built into the parole standards already. There's measurements and there's different processes to understand people's criminogenic needs, their risk factors, etc. And so our kind of feedback today is bringing community-based organizations like Breakthrough alongside those needs as solutions to help addressing individuals' criminogenic needs. The DOC already has space for interventions to address people's criminogenic needs, but the DOC doesn't have to do it alone. Partnerships with organizations like Breakthrough that are pre-vetted can help address individuals' needs and also take that burden off of DOC, especially during a time of staff shortage. ultimately, all of this is going to lead to a safer community and to taxpayer savings. So with that, I'm going to toss it over to Ashley, who's going to talk a little bit about her lived experience at this area.
Yeah, thank you so much, Stacy, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to just talk briefly today. Again, my name is Ashley First. I'm the Director of Business Development for Breakthrough, and in 2019, I was sentenced to 27 months in federal prison. And when I got there, I really needed help processing not only what I was going through, but also understanding how I even got there in the first place. My top issues were a substance misuse problem combined with mental health issues, but what were those other underlying causes that really made my thinking patterns the way that they were? What caused me to make those decisions that I made? I needed to address these so I could come home and rebuild my life and be successful. We all know reentry should begin on day one, and while you can't live on the outside while you're on the inside, it's still important to begin to think about what got you there and how you can come home and be successful and change your life for the better. The federal prison system has no programming like Breakthrough offers. The wait list for programming that they did have was close to 2 years in the facility I was at. And because of the long wait list, I couldn't get into any sort of reentry prep class, which was really just a short, like 2-hour seminar. And instead, upon my release, I was given a piece of paper that looked like it had been photocopied in about 1985 and was told that it was a list of second chance employers and good luck, and they sent me on my way. But there was nothing to help prepare me to come home, learn how to talk about my time I was incarcerated, address those underlying issues that got me to prison, and really learn how to repair relationships or job search with a criminal record, or learn how to navigate these lifelong barriers I was now faced with, which for some people, when they come out, that is enough of a stressor to relapse and then end up going back to prison. I had no wraparound supportive services, let alone ones that were customizable to my needs. I had no program or pathway in place that I could follow upon my release to learn how to rebuild my life. So to say that a program like Breakthrough provides would have been more than welcomed is really an understatement. And again, I was in the federal system, which is different than the state system, but I know from talking to our participants that programs to really help them address these underlying causes of incarceration are needed and wanted. No one wakes up and says that they want to go to prison and stay there and keep coming in and out, that revolving door. So one thing that Breakthrough does, besides getting people ready to come home and stay home, is give people hope. And you really can't underestimate the power of hope when it comes to reentry. So hope is that bridge between the possible and the impossible, the belief that your future can really be better and brighter than your past. And Breakthrough comes in and gives people the tools and skills that they need to be successful, really helps them see their potential and makes them want more for themselves. We've had people go through our programming and say, I didn't realize I could do all these things. Now I want to go on and get my associate's degree, get my bachelor's degree, keep improving themselves, create opportunities for them upon their release. So by creating an even better pathway to parole in collaboration with community partners like Breakthrough, you're really allowing people to see what they're capable of and that they're more than their past mistakes. And everyone should really have an opportunity to access something like this while they are incarcerated. So thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it. Back to you, Stacy.
That's it. We're happy to take any questions, guys.
Thank you. And members of the working group, we do have just about 2 minutes. Mr. Rains, I'll invite you in.
Yeah, hey, thank you both. I mean, I can tell you're super passionate about this issue and policy direction. This group is not going there in terms of pursuing those things, but where this group would go, and what I'm trying to take away from what you presented, is you feel strongly there should be a group that examines reentry and makes policy decisions on reentry. So I guess my ask of you would be, what should the composition of that group look like if this task force suggests a group for that purpose?
That's really great, Tom. Thank you for that. I think that the group could look very similar to this makeup. I'm looking at faces up top. And I know that Andre would be a helpful member in that regard. And people with lived experience, Ubaldo's on the working group. And that speaks to the testimony that we heard before, and to Ashley's testimony as well. I think that it'd be important to include wardens and staff that are on the ground, because they are really the ones who are saying what's going on within their facilities and working on reentry. And then also people in the parole space within the department as well.
Awesome.
Ashley, would you include anyone in that?
No,
that I missed?
hit everyone. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Rains, for the question, and thank you, Ashley and Stacy, for joining us. I will again invite you, if you've got additional thoughts on the future entity or entities, things like Mr. Rains was asking about membership, mission, where it should be housed, I'd encourage you to email those to us and we'll distribute those to the members. With that, I am going to move forward. We do have two additional scheduled speakers, Mr. Ed Wood and Demetrius Somerville. Before I go to Ed and Demetrius, though, we do have a block for public comment. The only person signed up at this point is John Longhill. So John, I'll invite you to join in and address the group. Because you are speaking during public comment, I won't have the opportunity for the group to ask questions or respond, but happy to give you the next 3 to 4 minutes to address the group.
Thanks, Derek. I'll just address it in the sequence of questions for the testimony. You know who I am, who I represent. I'm John Longhill with NeuroChange Solutions. I'm a heart math trainer and managing director of Right Brain Success, an educational company focusing on the neuroscience of change in human thought and behavior. I've been working with disadvantaged youth at risk for over 3 decades with experiential educational programs to engage and enlighten. And one of my nonprofits partnered with Colorado Outward Bound in their Pathfinder programs, young adults from 16 to 23 for over 10 years, and hundreds of other youth groups, including Rocky Mountain Youth Group, CASA, Keystone Science School, SOS Outreach, Summit County School System, Building Hope, Summit Advocates for Victims of Assault, and too many others to mention here. But I have 35 years of experience just being in the trenches with youth that are in survival. My previous experience with CCJJ, in what capacity and what other issues. I have no direct experience with CCJJ, but I have other experiences with the justice system and other capacities, which is directly related to this new juvenile justice initiative. In my experience, a simple but well-designed experiential educational program based in neuroscience over just an initial period of just 6 to 12 hours with structured follow-ups can have a profound effect on our youth and their behavior. And why this type of program is so impactful is because how the neuroscience of change is introduced and applied. It gives youth the tools to know the what and why of how information is processed in the brain so that the how of managing life correctly becomes readily apparent. 8 years ago, I was introduced to a neuroscience researcher, Dr. Joe Dispenza of NeuroChange Solutions, and he's pioneered a model for successful living based on the latest research in neuroscience. And I became certified to teach this program 5 years ago, and now understand the science about why those experiential programs that I taught for so many years have been so effective. And we began offering the NCS program to prisons near Mexico City, La Cana, Nezabarao, very notorious prisons known for their terrible conditions that exist there. And we've had over 1,200 prisoners and guards participate in this training this past year. And we're now bringing it to prisons here in the U.S. We just finished a pilot program in San Quentin this month, and it was so successful, they've contracted us to offer 12 more trainings in 2024. And, you know, this is words of the prisoners. You know, this training has given me a guide to changing my life, to discovering what type of man I want to be by thinking greater than my environment, my body, and time. I'm able to live in the now without the guilt and shame of the past mistakes I made. I'm able to give myself an awareness to a brighter future. Another prisoner that took the training. This experience has helped me to understand myself better and why I had those toxic thoughts for so many years. This experience has given me great insight on how to control and manage those thoughts, which has helped me to change my behavior and manage my emotions. This program has given me the chance to look at myself and become a better person. Another one, I'm inspired to have more compassion and forgiving, empathetic, peaceful, remorseful, humble, patient, and tolerant. I'm inspired to be a better person than I once was and grateful for this experience. And California has, created a $250 million initiative with San Quentin as the focus. And they've brought us in because we're able to present a program that's at the cutting edge of the latest research in neuroscience. And we're working on bringing this program to prisons in Minnesota, possibly the women's prison in Denver. I just assisted another NCS consultant with a successful training for over 30 recently released inmates through a halfway house nonprofit in Denver. And, we're finding that this work is so effective for helping people to get off drugs and other habitual negative behaviors. We're working with vets with PTSD, first responders, and even Navy SEAL teams. And we also work with a foundation called Give to Give for funding and support. So I feel like these latest breakthroughs in neuroscience are integral to effectively responding to the needs of our youth, because the latest research in brain science allows us, the true causes of illegal and destructive behavior, and it's based on how our thought is processed. And the good news is it also shows us how to deal with negative behavior, more effectively through this evidence-based knowledge and training. As we're all painfully aware, our criminal justice system primarily deals with the symptoms of abnormal behavior, like criminality, with incarceration, which is at best a temporary solution that just encourages more criminal behavior. And the latest discoveries in neuroscience and the practical application of these new models and tools deal with the causes of criminal behavior and should be integral to the discussion and planning of our governor's new initiative. And it's very much in line with his desire for evidence-based information to support this effort. My only experiences with CCJJ have been positive based on short conversations with Sheriff Jamie Fitzsimons about this initiative. My general thoughts about the creation of a new entity is I believe the creation of the new entity with a clear purpose and vision of how to reboot our justice system is essential. And this is what is needed in creating a new way that is focused on the rehabilitation through education and experiential developmental awareness about life and how to live it proactively and with full engagement. And do I align with the idea of a single entity? I strongly believe a single entity is the best way to formulate, design, and implement a new vision for juvenile justice. And this would make it easier for all involved to align with a new purpose and vision, bring the competent people on board to implement this vision, and create accountability for this implementation. My thoughts about the statutory mission: the mission should be clear with a definitive purpose, a vision for implementing that mission. The mission should identify what's wrong with the present system with a clear vision of what needs to change and why, so that the how is implemented in a way that serves to rally our community in positive and life-affirming ways. And I think where it should be housed, I think keeping it in the executive branch offers the most effective opportunities for implementation, awareness, and support from the stakeholders.
John, I'm sorry to cut you off. If I could ask you to wrap up, we're a few minutes past time, and I know we've got your written testimony as well, which I assure you will circulate.
Just in summary, I believe it's just time to deal with the causes, not the symptoms of criminal behavior in our youth. Symptomatic responses are only effective in the short term, obviously to protect society in the moment, but it does nothing to solve the problem in the long term, which is the causes of criminal behavior in youth. And these causes are based on how thoughts are processed, which affects choices and the actions that are taken, creating the experiences that are destructive and detrimental to our youth and society. So it's just time to make the hard choices and provide the resources, that are readily available to businesses in corporate America, and make that available, in a criminal justice system. And it's all based on the latest research in neuroscience. So thank you.
Thank you very much, John. And I apologize for having to cut it off. We're a few minutes past scheduled meeting. We've got a few more speakers. I know we've received your written testimony, and I want you to know that that's being circulated to all of the members of the TCJJ working group. Really appreciate you joining us. With that, I'd like to invite Ed Wood to join us. Ed will be followed by Demetrius, and that will conclude our speakers. We'll just go over a few next steps for the working group after that. But Ed, thank you for joining us.
You bet. Thank you very much. My name is Ed Wood, and I thank you for the invitation to speak with you today. In 2010, my 33-year-old son, Brian, was killed by two women at the wheel of one vehicle in the state of Washington. Both women were charged with a vehicular homicide caused by driving under the influence. Evidence included findings of a drug recognition expert and positive toxicology results for marijuana, methamphetamine, and heroin. I attended every day of the jury trial, where the women were found guilty of vehicular homicide, but due to driving with disregard for the safety of others. A conviction of driving under the influence would have resulted in a higher recommended sentencing range. Thus began my education on the legal issues of drug-impaired driving. In the years since then, I've worked with legal and technical experts worldwide to understand how this miscarriage of justice could occur. I've shared some of what I've learned in multiple presentations and publications, including some peer-reviewed journals. And naturally, I crossed paths with CCJJ in these endeavors, partly as a meeting observer, but more intently in two projects led by CCJJ. First was a bill to establish a 5 nanogram permissible entrance level for marijuana's THC in DUI cases. And second was Senate Bill 271, a 300-page bill to reform misdemeanors. In the first case, I volunteered to participate in the working group for CCJJ's Drug Policy Task Force. I was permitted all of 5 minutes to present the scientific evidence that a 5 nanogram THC limit would exonerate stoned drivers. It turns out the decision to submit a 5 nanogram limit to the legislature had already been made, and I need not have bothered. Since then, the Department of Public Safety has published evidence that the forecasted downside of the 5 nanogram limit was in fact correct. The next case included a proposal to create 2 felony offenses: vehicular homicide caused by DWAI, driving while ability impaired, and vehicular assault caused by DWAI. Now, vehicular homicide and assault are class 3 and 4 felonies, respectively, if caused by DUI, driving under the influence, but had never been unlawful if caused by the lesser DWAI offense. CCJJ decided to fix this by classifying both DWAI actions as class 5 felonies. I objected both in writing and orally within 2 days of learning of their plan, proposing instead that vehicular homicide and assault should be class 3 and 4 felonies regardless of the underlying impairment offense, DUI or DWAI. I was told that their class 5 decision for both offenses could not be revisited without revisiting all recommendations in the extensive proposal, and that could not be done as it would risk getting the bill to the legislature on time. Subsequent actions proved that objection to be false. After CCJJ approved class 5 for both offenses, it became class 5 and 6 for the 2 offenses by the time the bill was dropped in the legislature. It then became classes 4 and 5, a concession referred to as a drafting error repair, not an amendment. In exchange for that concession, I was asked to refrain from proposing a class 3 and 4 amendment at committee hearings. I declined that request. It became clear to me during multiple discussions with CCJ members that they had been misled to believe that DWAI vehicular homicide and assault were currently misdemeanors, and therefore believed that increasing the classification to anything above a low-level felony like a class 5 was just too big of a change. So based on my experiences, I have the following recommendations for CCJJ's successor. First and foremost, members must be honest and refrain from deceptive practices to support their positions. Fortunately, I have not seen examples of what I perceive to be deception and blatant dishonesty in CCJJ, other than that Senate Bill 271 episode, and I hope we see none in this replacement entity. Second, the replacement entity must respect, listen to, and professionally respond to informed citizen input. This obviously does not mean requiring adoption of all citizen input, but simply permitting public testimony and then ignoring it is disrespectful, to say the least. Third, the replacement entity must listen to victims. I have repeatedly witnessed, thank you, a soft on crime attitude in CCJJ, perhaps due to the group's initial charge in 2007. This attitude can and should be moderated with strong victim representation. Representation that can remind the Commission that sometimes justice demands that a criminal be incarcerated. Jenny Stith, for example, was a valuable victim representative who helped me get a little bit of traction with an otherwise non-responsive Commission. Fourth, and perhaps the most difficult, is that I believe the replacement entity should proactively seek out and listen to expert opinion and evidence that supports positions contrary to proposed administration policy. The replacement should not simply be a rubber stamp for political agendas. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ed. We have time for one quick question if I have members of the working group with any questions. Seeing no questions, Ed, thank you very much for your time. As you've heard me say to others, if you've got written comments or additional thoughts you'd like to share, we would welcome receiving those by email and happy to circulate that to the members of the working group as they continue their time together.
Thank you very
appreciate
much.
your time. Our final speaker today, before we give next steps and a reminder about our meeting later this week, is Demetrius Somerville from the Colorado Advocacy, who is a Colorado Advocacy Fellow. Demetrius, if we could get you to join, and we appreciate you being here.
Good afternoon, good morning to everyone. Before I get started, there's a lot of different directions this can go in, but I just wrote down a few things that I thought could help the CCJJ in navigating this cause as far as like being interactive with the community and things like that. My name is Demetrius Somerville. I'm representing myself and the Center for Employment Opportunity. I was invited by Ubaldo Chavez, which is a co-worker of mine. What I do here is I'm advocating for a pilot called Reentry Cash, and that's for every inmate coming out of prison to receive some type of assistance. And then once they find a job, they will receive $500 on top of whatever check they receive for 6 months, totaling $3,000. But I just wanted to share a few recommendations for the council, a little bit about myself. I have a bachelor's degree in communications. I also have 2 felonies, and I've been to both state and federal prison. So I have lived experience. I have the perspective of people who have no idea about meetings like this, and I commend you guys for having these. I just don't believe that these things are accessible to the people who we're trying to get the message to. So the 3 things I feel the council needs to do is they need to have interpersonal communication or communication with communities, be more tangible to these communities, which these communities are usually Black, brown, poor. And at the same time, the people in these communities are victims also, as well as could be the people who are the offenders. All these things go hand in hand in these communities, along with drug abuse. They should identify the people in and out of in the community who have influence. So by identifying these people with influence, you could get them to come out and how could I say, advocate for CCJJ in the communities to tell people about these meetings. You have to meet people where they're at. A lot of people aren't computer savvy, or they have no idea about this and have no way to get these information about these meetings. And these are the people whose life we will be affecting directly. We all talk about we want public safety. Well, the public safety begins with people taking accountability within their own communities to give back and to spread the word. And if we can reach the people who have influence in these communities, and this goes with the justice system, whether they're inside or locked up, because there's people behind bars that still have influence out in the community that can speak to certain individuals that can get these messages across to the people that need the support these type of meetings, which will make change eventually. There's a lot of different avenues I can go in about what else that could be done, but I just felt like these were the main ones. Also creating a safe space for these meetings, a space where these people can come, be heard by somebody tangible, not just a pamphlet or over the computer, so to speak. If a person could be there and they could tangibly hear what a person has to say and then come to these meetings where I'm at today. I'm fortunate enough to be invited here. I had no idea this was going on. I had no idea what CCJJ was, but I do feel like I have something to say. I thank you guys for the opportunity to allow me to come in and to be heard. And I would like to open the floor for questions if there are any, because I wanted to give feedback.
Thank you very much, Demetrius, and thank you, Ubaldo, for connecting us with you. Mr. Raines, please jump in.
Yeah, Mr. Somerville, thanks so much for participating today. Really appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
You hit something that I think we consistently struggle with when we're trying to figure these things out, which is how to identify the community members with influence. How do we find those folks? Because you said that's something we could do better, and I agree with you. And then how do we utilize them really as almost community emissaries, folks who can, as you pointed out, speak for and represent different communities. What's your advice on how to find these folks?
So I think that will begin with the communal space, a space, depending on what neighborhood you live in or what's happening in that neighborhood, a space where it would be zoned off for a safe space where people can get this information. And by having this safe space, having these meetings, or being able to reach the youth in these spaces, the spirit of giving. So you don't always have to give something physically. You can give knowledge. You can share a story. You can have a communication through generations. And it usually starts with the older ones and the youth. And the youth usually have a person that they look up to that's not really that much older. They're not even our age or close to it, but it's a older person that might have went to jail for the first time, and now they have a felony. That's going to change the trajectory of their life for the rest of their life, and they're 19 years old. Now they have a felony. So these are different stories that they can share with the youth, or just a space where, you can invite them to have these meetings. This is the topic. This is what we're talking about. It could possibly start at a community center or a rec center, but I think that would have to take place depending on, the resources in these communities.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Demetrius. Thank you, Mr. Raines. With that concludes I'm sorry, Chair Kane, I see you've got a question, so I'll give you the floor.
Just one question, Demetrius. As you were talking about finding the people in the communities that are leaders, do you think we need to spend more time with church leaders? How strong do you think, how important is it to work with maybe those people in the community?
Well, I was going to say, I think that depends on the community itself, because the people in the community knows who their leaders are. So it would only take a couple of, reaches to talk to a couple of people to see how they feel about different individuals in their community. Definitely the church is a good place to start. Me, myself, I live on the hillside in Colorado Springs. I am mentored by Promise Lee. He's an ex-offender. He's also now a pastor, and I go to church with him every Sunday, and he is still actively engaged in my community. So, that always is a very good start, as long as the community knows that that person holds a certain regard and respect. And then I believe those individuals could be representatives for meetings like CCJJ to get the word out and understand that these are issues that we're dealing with and they're talking about. They have no idea about it, so it's not real to them. This is the community I'm speaking for. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Demetrius. Thank you, Ms. Kane, for the question. With that, that's going to conclude our formal program today. I do want to very much thank everybody who stuck around. I know we ran about 20 minutes over time. Your chairs and the members of the working group wanted to make sure we continue to get as diverse of perspectives as possible. As one final reminder before I hand it to Maureen to close us out, our Friday meeting will be a full-length meeting from 9 o'clock to 1 p.m. That again is moved due to an incident at the Car Justice Building. So we'll be meeting at the Capitol in House Committee Room 107. I would highly encourage everybody to get there at least 5-10 minutes early to be ready to go through security and sit down. We've got a full agenda as we pivot and start moving from all of the great testimony we've had into more conversations about the future and your reactions and reflections. Maureen, I'll hand it to you to close us out.
Thanks, Barrick. Yes, we have been spending most of our time listening, which I think has been very important. The concentration of the next meeting will be to hear from each of you. So Barrick and Carrie will be sending a lot of information, any of the written testimony. There's testimony that we've received from people inside prisons, other people who have sent us written testimony. Those will be emailed to you to look at before Friday's meeting. But I'd ask you to give some thought to your answers to the questions we've been asking the public the public testimony to respond to. What do you think we need to do? What would that look like? What would membership? What would mission be? And we're going to ask each of you to give some preliminary thoughts about that for the next meeting and have some discussion, and then start to drill down on the specific issues that we need to look at in creating and making recommendations for subsequent entity or entities. So just a heads up, we will, as I indicated, start out with a presentation from Vera. Also, the slideshow that Barrick had for the meeting about other states will be provided to you and emailed directly to you, so you can review that as you think about your answers to the questions. And we'll, just dive into discussion. If you can be there in person, that's great. If not, we obviously have Zoom available. Tom, do you want to add anything else?
No, I think you captured it. I just want to thank everybody who participated today and in previous meetings. We've got so much to digest and work from that I think we've got a good base to start from next meeting.
Wonderful. With that, we will conclude this meeting with thanks to the chairs for compiling all of these great witnesses. Thanks to the members of the working group for your continued time and generous contributions, and to all of the members of the public who have been joining us. We will see all the members of the working group later this week for our in-person or hybrid meeting. Thank you all.